She's still bleeding, I said, holding my wife upright with one arm while pressing a towel against the hospital blanket with the other. Dr. Marcus Vale didn't even look down. He signed the discharge form like my wife's blood on the floor was just another spill for housekeeping. Her scans are inconclusive. She's stable enough to go home. She can't stand. Then help her. The nurse beside him lowered her eyes as she handed me the papers. Behind us, two security guards waited near the sliding doors. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Then, a billing clerk stepped forward with a clipboard. Your balance tonight is $18,000. I stared at her. You brought me a bill before a wheelchair? My wife Mara squeezed my wrist so weakly I almost missed it. Zoe, something's wrong inside. Dr. Vale finally looked at me. Take her home before this becomes a compliance issue. That was when I realized he wasn't trying to help us leave. He was trying to make us disappear. It was 2:13 in the morning, and the ER hallway smelled like antiseptic and rainwater tracked in from the parking lot. Mara sat hunched in a plastic chair, still wearing the hospital bracelet they had slapped on her 6 hours earlier after a routine outpatient procedure turned into pain so sharp she could barely breathe. I kept saying, please check her again. Dr. Vale kept saying there's no medical reason to admit her. A younger nurse stood behind him, staring at the blanket over Mara's lap. Her mouth opened like she wanted to speak. Dr. Vale turned his head. She went silent. That scared me more than the bill. I was 24, broke, newly married, and I had trusted people in white coats because I thought they had rules they couldn't break. But when I asked what would happen if I refused to take Mara home, Dr. Vale leaned closer and said, then I'll document that you declined discharge instructions. Outside, rain soaked my sleeves as I helped Mara into our car. The discharge papers slid off the dashboard. The $18,000 bill landed face up between us. I called the hospital again. Voicemail. Then Mara coughed, folded forward, and whispered, Zoe. I grabbed my phone and called the one person I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. When I said Dr. Vale's name, the person on the other end went completely silent. The windshield wipers slammed back and forth as I ran a red light. Mara, stay with me. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone into the passenger seat. She leaned against the window, pale enough to look gray under the streetlights. Blood stained the blanket bundled against her stomach. I'm okay, she whispered. You're not okay. Another cough hit her. She pressed her hand over her mouth too slowly. Blood streaked across her fingers. Hours earlier, we had walked into St. Catherine's ER thinking something had gone wrong after her outpatient procedure. At first, nobody seemed alarmed. Then, the bleeding started. After that, everything changed. The receptionist had asked for insurance information 3 separate times before anyone checked Mara's pain level. One nurse muttered that all trauma rooms were full. Another asked whether we could wait it out at home. Mara had noticed it too. They look at us different, she had whispered while curled in the waiting chair, like they already decided we can't pay. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Back in the ER hallway, I'd overheard 2 nurses arguing near the medication station. She shouldn't be leaving. One of them said quietly, Vale already signed the discharge. She needs imaging repeated. He said no. At the time, I convinced myself there had to be something they knew that I didn't. Doctors didn't send dying people home. Right? Mara suddenly grabbed my sleeve. Zoe, maybe we should just go home. What? We can't afford another hospital. The words hit harder than anything Dr. Vale had said. I looked at the bill again, sitting beside the gear shift. $18,000. We had been married 8 months. We barely had enough saved for rent. My phone crackled through the car speakers. Zoe? A woman's voice said sharply. Elena, what symptoms does she have? I explained as fast as I could, the bleeding, the dizziness, the discharge. Then silence. Finally, Elena asked one question. Did they discharge her while she was actively bleeding? Yes. Her tone changed instantly. Do not go home. Listen carefully to me. Drive to Mercy General right now. You think it's serious? I think your wife is in danger. I pulled into Mercy General less than 10 minutes later. Before I even parked, 2 paramedics rushed toward the car with a gurney. A trauma nurse pulled back Mara's blanket. Her entire expression changed. How long has she been bleeding like this? Hours, I said. The nurse looked directly at me. If you were 30 minutes later, she would have died. The surgery doors slammed shut hard enough to echo through the waiting area. Then everything went quiet except for the sound of monitors somewhere behind the walls. I stood there, covered in dried blood, holding Mara's phone and hospital bracelet while nurses rushed past me. A trauma surgeon pulled off his gloves and walked straight toward me. Your wife has severe internal bleeding, he said. This should have been treated hours ago. I stared at him. They discharged her. His face tightened. Who discharged her? Dr. Marcus Vale. The surgeon looked over at another doctor standing nearby. Neither of them said anything for a second. Then he muttered, Jesus Christ. An hour later, Elena arrived. I barely recognized her at first. She looked older than when she disappeared from our family years ago, sharper somehow, carrying a leather folder under one arm and moving through the hospital like she already knew where she was going. You kept the paperwork? She asked immediately. I handed her everything, discharge forms, billing documents, even the stained wristband. She spread the papers across a waiting room table. Then she froze. Stable upon release, she read aloud. The trauma surgeon overheard her and walked over. You're telling me they documented her as stable? He asked. Elena handed him the form. He read it once and looked furious. No competent physician discharges a patient in that condition. That was the first moment I realized this was becoming bigger than us. Elena lowered her voice. Zoe, this isn't the first complaint tied to Vale's ER. What do you mean? I mean, I've seen patterns before. While Mara was still in surgery, I searched Dr. Vale's name online. Former patients described being rushed out despite worsening symptoms. Families complained about massive bills for minimal treatment. One post claimed records had been changed after discharge. Then a private message appeared from an account with no profile picture. I used to work there. They alter charts before audits. Before I could reply, my phone rang, unknown number. I answered immediately. Miss Tao, Dr. Vale said calmly. I think there's been a misunderstanding about emergency protocols. You sent my wife home while she was bleeding. I understand emotions are high. You knew something was wrong. You were informed there was a risk of post-procedure complications. Elena's head snapped toward me. I quietly turned on speakerphone recording. Dr. Vale kept talking. If every possible hemorrhage concern required admission, emergency departments would collapse. The room went completely still. He had just admitted he knew hemorrhaging was possible before discharging her. I slowly looked at Elena. She stared at the phone for one long second. Then she said, he just admitted knowledge. This changes everything. By morning, St. Catherine's Hospital looked nothing like the place that had thrown us out 6 hours earlier. Administrators were rushing through hallways with folders pressed against their chests. Security guards stood outside conference rooms. Phones rang nonstop behind reception desks. Alina had officially filed an emergency state inquiry before sunrise. And suddenly, everyone was panicking. Dr. Vale called me 3 times before 9 a.m. I ignored the first 2. On the third voicemail, his voice sounded completely different from the cold arrogance in the ER. Ms. Tao, I strongly advise against making assumptions before all records are reviewed. These situations can become complicated. Mara was still in recovery after emergency surgery. I played the message for Elena while she reviewed copies of the hospital records. Then she stopped flipping pages. These vitals are wrong. What? She pointed at the chart. Pain levels reduced. Bleeding observations removed. Timestamps don't match. I felt cold all over. They changed it? They modified the chart after discharge. Elena looked up at me. That can become criminal very fast. By afternoon, staff inside St. Catherine's started turning on each other. The same nurse who had stared at the blood on Mara's blanket finally agreed to speak privately. She met us in a parking garage 2 blocks from the hospital, still wearing scrubs under a hoodie. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Vale ordered us to clear critical cases before the inspection, she whispered. Mostly uninsured patients. Inspection? I asked. The ER mortality numbers were under review. Administration wanted beds cleared before auditors arrived. She swallowed hard before continuing. People who questioned discharge orders got threatened. Then she handed Alina a flash drive. Surveillance backup, she said, before they erase it. That night, Elena opened the footage. The video showed Mara collapsing near the discharge desk while I begged for help. A staff member reached toward us. Another pulled them back. No one readmitted her. No one even approached. The footage spread internally first. Then leaked emails followed. Bed optimization targets. Admission reduction strategy. Executive incentive metrics. Within hours, reporters crowded outside St. Catherine's. News vans lined the street. Dr. Vale's attorney released a statement blaming miscommunication during high patient volume. Then, Mercy General's trauma surgeon signed a sworn affidavit stating Mara's discharge had directly endangered her life. I saw Dr. Vale on television leaving through a side entrance while reporters shouted questions after him. Did you knowingly discharge unstable patients? Were records altered? Did hospital leadership pressure doctors? He kept walking. Then my phone rang again. The frightened nurse was whispering so quietly, I could barely hear her. They're shredding paperwork tonight. Alina grabbed her keys before I could even respond. Minutes later, we were speeding toward St. Catherine's as red and blue police lights flashed across the rain-soaked streets ahead of us. By the time Elena and I reached St. Catherine's, investigators were already moving through the records department. Uniformed officers stood at every entrance while hospital employees crowded the lobby whispering to each other. Some looked terrified. Others looked relieved. One investigator wheeled out boxes filled with files. Another carried hard drives sealed in evidence bags. We were minutes away from losing everything. They started shredding before we got the warrant approved, Elena said as she showed her credentials at the security line. But not fast enough. Inside the records office, paper scraps still littered the floor near industrial shredders. A hospital administrator sat pale-faced in a chair, while investigators photographed computer terminals. Then the evidence started connecting. Server backups recovered deleted nursing notes. Security footage confirmed the original timestamps. Internal emails showed executives discussing ways to reduce non-revenue admissions before a state funding audit. One message hit hardest of all: avoid extended ER occupancy among high-cost uninsured cases whenever medically defensible. Mara had never been treated like a patient. She had been treated like a financial problem. Over the next 48 hours, the entire story unraveled. Dr. Vale and senior administrators had been under pressure for months because the hospital's emergency mortality numbers were drawing scrutiny. According to investigators, departments were quietly encouraged to discharge unstable, uninsured patients whenever possible to improve metrics and preserve executive bonuses. Mara's case became impossible to hide because the bleeding was visible. If she had been formally admitted, the records would have triggered mandatory review. So instead, her condition was downgraded. Her chart was altered, and she was pushed out the door with an $18,000 bill. The recorded phone call destroyed Dr. Vale's defense completely. If every possible hemorrhage concern required admission, that sentence played repeatedly across news broadcasts for days. When I finally saw Mara awake after surgery, she looked smaller somehow. Exhausted, fragile, but alive. A trauma surgeon stood beside her bed reviewing scans when she quietly asked, "Was it really that bad?" He hesitated. Then, he answered honestly, "You should never have left that first hospital." Mara covered her face and started crying. Not loudly. just silent tears sliding into the pillow while monitors beeped beside her. I thought maybe I was overreacting, she whispered. I grabbed her hand immediately. No, they made us think that. For weeks afterward, everything escalated fast. The state suspended Dr. Vale's medical license pending investigation. Multiple nurses testified that discharge orders had been manipulated before inspections. Hospital executives resigned within days. Insurance providers froze payments connected to suspicious billing practices. Former patients came forward publicly with nearly identical stories. Then the security footage leaked. The entire country watched me begging for help while Mara bled through a hospital blanket near the ER exit. Public outrage exploded overnight. Protesters gathered outside St. Catherine's every day after that. Months later, Mara and I sat together inside the medical licensing hearing. Dr. Vale looked completely different from the man who had towered over us in the ER hallway. No confidence, no control, just exhaustion. His attorney argued that emergency departments forced doctors into impossible decisions under pressure. But then investigators played the recorded phone call. The room went silent again, just like the first time Elena heard it. Except this time, there was nowhere for him to hide behind hospital policy. The board revoked his license before the hearing even ended. Dr. Vale stood up slowly, gathered his papers, and walked out alone while reporters crowded the hallway outside. None of the hospital staff who once protected him would even look at him. Mara recovered slowly after that. There were follow-up surgeries, physical therapy. Nights she still woke up shaking from nightmares about the hospital hallway. But she survived. And eventually, our house stopped feeling like a place where bad news arrived every day. The lawsuits continued. Settlement offers filled our mailbox. Interview requests piled up. But for the first time in months, things were quiet. One evening, while organizing paperwork at the kitchen table, I found the original hospital bill again. $18,000. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it back into the drawer. Because the last thing Dr. Vale handed me was that bill, and it became the evidence that destroyed him.